welcome everybody to our Aseret Yemei Teshuva, our 10 days of repentance class. Class is actually Shiurim, with the goal to try to capitalize on what these Aseret Yemei Teshuva are all about. Both Rabbi Lichter and I hope that by the end of tonight's session, that you will be sufficiently motivated to take what we've shared with you tonight into Yom Kippur, and hopefully for it to make a difference for you Yom Kippur evening and Yom Kippur day as well. Okay, so the topic for my piece tonight is that we are clearly a people of the book. I think if you ask anybody whether or not that's the case, they'll tell you, yes, of course, we are a people of the book. We're known as the people of the book. We're a people of the book known throughout the world. But are we a people of our word? Meaning, does our word count? Is it something that people can rely on? Is it something that we can rely on, something our loved ones can rely on? Or perhaps our word is not nearly as obligatory or as binding as we might have thought it could be. So on the one hand, absolutely, we are a people of the word. We're people of our word. How do we know that? Because think of what the value of words are for the Jewish people. The very first bracha that Yitzchak gives to his children, to Yaakov and Esav, involve Yaakov's voice. When Yaakov deceives his father, Yitzchak, and comes in, and Yitzchak feels him and says, "Whoa, this guy, who is this guy?" So Yaakov says, "It's me, it's Esav." And Yitzchak's not convinced. And Yitzchak says, wait a second. Hakol kol Yaakov v'hayidayim yidei Esav. The kol, the voice, that's the voice of Yaakov. The hands are hairy, the arms are hairy. Those are the hands of Esav. That's not simply a physical description, although Rashi says part of what convinced Yitzchak that this was the voice of Jacob, of Yaakov, was not only his voice, but it was what he said. And when Yitzchak said, how'd you get back here so quickly? So Yaakov said, God helped me. And right away, Yitzchak is saying, wait a second. Esav never says God helps me, right? So the very fact that Yaakov said, God helps me, this is the kol of Yaakov. But our tradition takes it one step further. And what does our tradition understand? That what Yitzchak was giving to these two children was in effect a bracha for the future. That when the kol of Yaakov is weak, then the hands of Esav will be stronger. And when the voice of Yaakov, when the sound of Yaakov's voice is strong, then the hands of Esav will be weaker. What is the voice of Yaakov? What was Yitzchak talking about according to the Gemara? He was talking about a voice that's heard in the Beis Medrash, a voice of Torah learning, and a voice that's heard in the Beis HaKnesses, the voice of davening, of prayer, of tefillah. Though that represents the voice of Yaakov. So are we a people of our word? We certainly are. Words are very important to us. Tefillah, the words of learning Torah, the words of prayer, these are hallmarks. They're identifying features of the Jewish people. So certainly from that perspective, words are very important to us. Not only that, but the Torah itself tells us. The Torah says, Midavar sheker tirchak, meaning you should avoid dishonesty. You should avoid lying. I can't say one thing and do something else. I'm obligated to follow my word. The Torah itself obligates me to follow my word. Think for a moment of the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim and all of the laws of Shmiras HaLashon, right, of Lashon Hara, all of the things that we study about the Chafetz Chaim. Obviously, our words are significant. Our words are important. And not only that, but we can actually create Torah prohibitions by words that we say. These are called nedarim. In other words, I'm allowed to have a hot pastrami sandwich, right? I don't know from a health perspective whether that's a good thing or not a good thing, but from a Torah perspective, I'm allowed to have a hot pastrami sandwich. But let's say I say to myself, I take an oath that I will not eat a hot pastrami sandwich. So that hot pastrami sandwich, which is absolutely kosher to everyone else and was kosher to me before I said that, that becomes like treif for me. My words can create a situation of absolute prohibition, and prohibition on a biblical level. So my words are crucial. The Torah tells me I'm not allowed to deceive someone with my words. I'm not allowed to go shopping and to engage in banter conversation with the salesman. And the salesman gets the impression that I want to buy something from him. I'm not allowed to mislead him like that. I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not allowed to say to somebody, oh, you're about Teshuva. You think you're such a big deal. I remember when you were eating hot pastrami sandwiches with cheese on them. I'm not allowed to go back and remind somebody of their past. That's ona'as devarim, words that hurt. And those words that hurt are prohibited. So are we a people of words? Absolutely. Words are very, very important to us. At the same time, and particularly at this time of the year, maybe it doesn't seem like words are so important to us. And the reason for that is due to a custom which is mentioned by the Shla. The Shla is an abbreviation of the work by Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz. The Shla, Shin Lamed Hey, stands for Shnei Luchot Habrit. That was the title of the work that he did, and he's called the Shla. So he writes in his laws of a custom that you're pretty much all familiar with, and that is the custom of Hataras Nedarim. That on Erev Rosh Hashanah, what happens? On Erev Rosh Hashanah, we stand before a tribunal, before a bezdin of 3 individuals, and we read from the Siddur, literally 2 pages worth, in which we ask to be released from any vows that we have made. And not only do we ask to be released from any vows that we have made, but we do even something better than that. What do we say? And any vows that I'm going to make for next year are also not going to be binding upon me. An incredible minhag. The Gemara in Maseches Nedarim says that this is actually the source of what we do Yom Kippur evening. Yom Kippur evening, we call Kol Nidre. We make such a big deal about Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre has this haunting melody to it. You have to be in shul for Kol Nidre. If you're not in shul for Kol Nidre, you're not Jewish, right? So Kol Nidre is a big deal. What is Kol Nidre? What do the words Kol Nidre mean? It means every neder, every oath, every vow, every promise, every commitment that we've made should be null and void. That doesn't seem to me like a people of the word. That doesn't seem to me like a people who keeps our word. If I say that every promise that I made, every oath that I take should be null and void, both what I did last year and what I'm going to do this coming year. So what good is anything that I say? What good is any promise that I make, any commitment that I make? Where does it have any standing? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you tonight perhaps a way of understanding this contradiction. On the one hand, words are very, very important to us. And on the other hand, the customs of Hataras Nedarim and Kol Nidre, of the nullification of our oaths, both Erev Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur evening, try to resolve what seems to be a contradiction between those two. So just an interesting question. Why is it that we begin the holiest day of the year by asking to be released from our oaths? And by the way, it's very interesting because those of you who have been in shul on Erev Rosh Hashanah, you know that when we do Hataras Nedarim, what happens? Everybody stands up, the Beis Din sits down, and everybody reads together from the Siddur, asking to be released from their promises, from their oaths, from their vows. There's an opinion in the Shulchan Aruch that says you should do the same thing on Kol Nidre. You shouldn't just sit there listening to the Chazan. It's very nice to sit and listen to the Chazan, but you shouldn't just be sitting there listening to the Chazan. You should actually be saying the words of Kol Nidre in an undertone along with the Chazan, because he can't ask for you to be released from your vows. He can ask to be released from his vows. But he and the 2 people on his side, they're the bezdin. We're asking them to release us. So simply to listen to him singing, as beautiful as the singing is, it doesn't fulfill the purpose of Kol Nidre. So we are supposed to literally say the words along with him. And even that's not enough, because we're supposed to know what the words mean that we're saying. It's not sufficient just to recite Kol Nidre with, sort of like hocus pocus. We need to understand the words. Look at it in English. Say it in English, right? If you don't understand the words that you're saying, it doesn't have an impact. It doesn't have an effect. It's not just magical. Literally, we need to be asked to be released from these vows. So why do we start the holiest day of the year with Kol Nidre, with asking to be released from vows? I could think of a lot more important things that we should begin the holiest day of the year for. And maybe I can ask to be forgiven for my lashon hara. Maybe I can ask to be forgiven for the times I talked in shul. Maybe I can ask to be forgiven for the things that I ate that were inappropriate. Maybe I can be asked to be forgiven for the times where I fell short on my ben adam lechaveru. I can think of plenty of things to ask for, but I should begin Kol Nidre as saying, okay, God, the holiest day of the year, I'm going to ask to be forgiven from any vows or promises that I've made, and I'm going to set out a declaration that any vows or promises or oaths that I make for the future, I shouldn't be bound by those things. Why of all things do I begin Kol Nidre with that? So it's an interesting interpretation to suggest that obviously Yom Kippur is a continuation of this time of judgment of the Aseret Yemei Teshuva, that God continues to judge us. And we are terrified that if we are being judged not having fulfilled our vows, our promises, our commitments, our oaths, our assurances to others, that God is not going to judge us favorably. And what's the understanding behind that? Imagine what happens if a husband says to his wife, says, dear, I love you so much, I'm going to do the dishes tonight. And he doesn't do the dishes. And the next night he says to her, dear, I love you so much, I'm going to do the dishes tonight. And he doesn't do the dishes that night. What's going to happen the third night when he says to her, I love you so much, I'm going to do the dishes? She's not going to be a happy camper. And she's not going to believe him. So imagine how HaKadosh Baruch Hu, imagine how God feels. Here, we're taking all these promises upon ourselves. I'm going to be a good person. I'm going to study more Torah. I'm going to come to shul more. I'm going to daven better. I'm going to give more tzedakah. I'm going to do more chesed. I'm doing all of these things. We're taking all these obligations upon ourselves. And at the same time, as we're talking out of one side of our mouth, what does God see? God says, yeah, what about all those promises that you made? What about the promise you made to Chaim and to Reuben and to Rivka? What about all those promises? Right? You're making me promises. What about all those promises? So if God judges me when I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth like that, so I don't stand a good chance of being judged favorably. So what I want to do, Kol Nidre, when I go into Yom Kippurim, is I want to be released from those vows. I want to say, God, I made a mistake when I made those vows. I made a mistake when I made those promises. I made a mistake when I made those assurances. I didn't realize that I wouldn't be able to do it. I didn't realize that I couldn't meet those expectations. Please allow me to be released from those. And if I go into my conversation with God, released from those vows, released from those commitments, released from those promises, so then maybe there's a better chance that God will believe me when I make the promises and the commitments and the assurances to him. It's always interesting. I always wondered, why is it that last year I said Kol Nidre, and in Kol Nidre last year, I said, I want to be released from any vows that I made the year before. I think there was a year before COVID. This was the pre-COVID year. I want to be released from any vows pre-COVID, and I want to be released from any vows this coming year. And now what am I going to do this Yom Kippur? I'm going to say, I want to be released from any vows that I made the past year. Wait a second. I already covered myself last Kol Nidre. Why am I doing that again? And the answer to that question is because this Kol Nidre, this Hataras Nadarim, this declaration doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. If you remember that you made such a statement on Erev Rosh Hashanah or on Kol Nidre night, you remember that you made a statement that your vows are not going to be binding, they're not going to be obligatory, and then you go ahead and vow again, the halacha is that vow is not nullified. Because you knew and you set your mind to vow again, even though you knew you made such a declaration. So this concept of Hataras Nadarim, this concept of Kol Nidre, this concept of going into Yom Kippurim without these vows, without these commitments hanging over our head, actually teaches us a very important lesson. And I like to say that Hataras Nadarim and Kol Nidre is in place precisely because words are so important to us. Precisely because Judaism values what a word can accomplish, whether it's a word of prayer, whether it's a word of Torah study, whether it's a word of encouragement, whatever that word is, Judaism values that word. And we highlight, we emphasize the importance of the words that we use by specifically introducing a practice, Hataras Nadarim Kol Nidre, by introducing this practice that drives home the lesson of how important words can be. Why do we want to go into this period of Yom Kippurim with an emphasis on how important words can be? So it's interesting. On Yom Kippur, we try to be like the angels. We're wearing white. We're not drinking. We're not eating. We're avoiding the physical pleasures of the world. We're like the angels. We're so much so like the angels that at night when we daven Mariv, Kol Nidre night, we say out loud, Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuso Li'olam Va'ed, which we never say out loud. We say it out loud that night because we're like the angels. Usually we hide it because we stole it from the angels, right? But tonight we want to be like angels. Angels don't eat, we don't eat. Angels don't drink, we don't drink. Right? We want to be like angels on Yom Kippur. However, there's a very important piece that distinguishes us from everything else in the world, from every other creature in the world. And what is that? That is our ability to speak. We take our physicality, we take our gashmias, and we subjugate it to be like the angels. But the part that makes us uniquely human is speech. Eating doesn't make us uniquely human, especially if you see what people sometimes do at Kiddush. Drinking doesn't make us uniquely human. Speaking makes us uniquely human. And even though we don't eat and we don't drink and we're trying to sanctify the physical part of us, so the idea is that we will also try to sanctify the part that makes us uniquely human, namely the words that we use, by highlighting when we begin Yom Kippur with just how important those words are. We had a chazan many years ago here by the name of Sruli Hirsch. I don't know how many of you remember Sruli Hirsch. A great inspirational chazan, has since moved on to bigger and better things. But on Yom Kippurim, Sruli Hirsch would not speak other than words of davening. He took what's called a ta'anit dibur, a fast, but not a fast of not eating, a fast of not speaking. And why did he take such a fast? Because he didn't want to risk ruining this uniquely human characteristic on the day of being judged. He wanted to use his gift of kol, of voice, in prayer, in Torah study, but not in mindless or idle or inappropriate conversation. That's what Yom Kippur is all about. We, on the one hand, emphasize that physically we can be like the angels, but we can also be uniquely human in safeguarding this gift which God gave us, the gift of speech. Hataras Nadarim Kol Nidre, when you sit in shul Kol Nidre night, think about that, think about what the value is, think of what the message is for all of us, and let's take that message of being careful with what we say. of following up on our commitments and thinking twice before we say things. Being careful with what we say. Can we take that throughout the year? Our hope and our prayer is that all of us will be inscribed and sealed in the book of a year of health and happiness, and please God, a year that will be a better year for the Jewish people and a better year for the world. Rabbi Lichter, all yours.
Amen. Yasher koach, Rabbi. Thank you so much for really such an encouragement of watching what we say and who we say it to, and never enough times can we hear how significant the gift of speech is. Yasher koach to everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you so much. It's always a wonderful opportunity to share some words of Torah, specifically during these very significant days of Aseret Yemei Teshuva. So for me, Teshuva is really not a theoretical concept. It truly is practical, as I really hope it is for everybody. There's so much that I need to do Teshuva for. There are certain things, though, that every year I kind of forget, oh yeah, I did back when. And I always can't help but to think when I was a teenager. And I think specifically when the later years of my teenage years, I contributed a great deal of anxiety to my mother's life, specifically my mother. Well, my father wasn't an exemption all the time, but specifically my mother. And it happened oftentimes when I was driving out at night. And she was always concerned when would Ian come home. You know, they had cell phones back then, you know, whatever it was, but I didn't have a cell. My first cell phone was my year in Israel. So I certainly wasn't calling when I was ready to come home. And my parents never gave me any type of curfew or anything like that. They just always told me to be smart and make good decisions. And I remember that my mother would always tell me she had great anxiety until I walked back into the house. And she said, even before I came home, she knew when I was coming home, because the dog, and maybe those of you dog lovers can relate to this perhaps, the dog, approximately 2 to 3 minutes before I would walk in, the dog could be sleeping, nothing going on. 2 to 3 minutes before I would walk in, the dog would get up and start walking around the house and barking. And sure, every time it would happen, I would walk in 2 to 3 minutes later. And I really, every time I talk to my mother before Yom Kippur, I always bring up the fact and try to apologize once again. I'm sorry for causing you anxiety every time I drove at night. And it's probably because I had my fair share of accidents, and those good decisions that they relied on me for weren't always there. But this concept of somebody waiting for someone else to return, that's not a new concept. In fact, is what the topic that I chose to speak about with you tonight is the understanding, when is the first mentioning of somebody awaiting someone else's arrival? And that's, of course, the mother of Sisera. And we'll get into the story just a little bit, but the mother of Sisera is, of course, awaiting her son, who's this great Canaanite general, fighting against the Jewish people, a cruel and vicious individual as he was. But she always knew that he would return, and she was always awaiting his return. And we find that although this is a great story in Tanakh, and it's actually special to me because it's kind of the prelude to my Haftorah for my Bar Mitzvah Parsha, Chazal really chose to memorialize this story by connecting it to the mitzvah of shofar. And it's always been the strangest question that we can ask. In fact, this year, some of you, part of the reason that I chose this topic is because I fielded this question from a number of you just this year. Of why is it that Chazal chose to attach the mother of Sisera and her cries to some symbolic nature of shofar? So just be able to make sure we're all on the same page here. The Gemara actually tells us, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Lamed Gimel Beis 33b, where the Gemara tells us that they're unsure of the exact nature that the sound of the teruah is supposed to make. Right now, everybody knows tekiah, shvar, and teruah. We don't make any indecisions with these types of things. But the Gemara didn't know exactly what type of teruah. And the Gemara says, as part of that passage, there is that we can go and kind of be able to figure it out based on the cry of the mother of Sisera. whether she wailed or whether she moaned or a combination of both. And the Gemara seems to indicate that the truest sound that we all are aware of nowadays comes from the type of moaning and crying and wailing that the mother of Sisera wept while waiting for her son. So the Gemara connects the quality of the shofar blower of Trua to the mother of Sisera. But what's more than that is in Tosfot's commentary on the page there. Tosfot quotes the opinion of the Aruch. The Aruch was a contemporary of Rashi. And the Aruch says that it's not only in quality, but in quantity as well that we have this connection. Because the 100 shofar blasts that we blow shofar with, and this is not just the Trua, but the Tekiah Shvarim Trua, we know the 100 shofar blasts, those are also connected to the 100 cries that the mother of Sisera, again, wept while waiting for her son, the general Sisera. And so the question beckons of what are Chazal doing here? What are they thinking? To connect this mother of this awful general, an enemy of the Jewish people, as we'll see when we go through the story, what are Chazal really thinking? There are so many great people that we could connect shofar to. I love the tefillos of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I'm sure so many of you are able to connect as well. At the end of the year, they often publish like magazines or newspapers even have it, kind of end of year, people who have passed away throughout the year, people who have accomplished certain things throughout the year. It's kind of a recap and a review of the entire year. And I often feel that specifically the Rosh Hashanah Shmona Esrei, we recap so much of Jewish history. Kind of starting from Adam Harishon, and we go through Noach, these 3 brachos of Malchios and Zichronos and Shofros, we almost mention everybody. And certainly when we turn our attention to the imahos of the great women of the Jewish people, so we of course know that Hannah and her petitions in front of Eli in the Mishkan and everything that she asked for regarding to have a son of Shmuel, that becomes the paradigm for the amount of brachos, the 9 brachos, the quality of brachos that we have for Rosh Hashanah. We know that we read Kriyas HaTorah all about Sarah and her challenges and ultimately her ability to have this wonderful child, Yitzchak. There are so many people to choose from if we wanted to connect shofar to one of these individuals. And even in the story itself, we know that it's Devorah who is the judge. She's the shofet at the time of the Jewish people. She's the woman judge that we have. An incredible testament that she was able to be the one individual to lead the Jewish people at that time. Why don't we emphasize her more? And we don't emphasize Devorah. And we could emphasize Yael. Yael is the Canaanite. We'll learn about her, that she's the non-Jewish individual who ends up killing Sisera. And why don't we emphasize her? Instead, as I'm suggesting, we go to the mother of Sisera. And again, this really calls our attention to what Chazal were trying to emphasize for us when they suggested that this mother of Sisera should be somebody that we think about when we're blowing shofar. There's so many different intentions, so many different concentrations that we're supposed to have throughout the day of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Why is it that we go to the mother of Sisera? So I saw a really fascinating suggestion. It's quoted in the name of Rav Soloveitchik. I haven't actually seen him in his writings, but it is quoted in his name that I want to share with you. So there's a significant medrash that's actually on this week's parsha, where the pasuk tells us Zechor Yemos Olam Bino Shnos Dor Vador, which essentially is translated as that we should remember our history. We should know our past history. We should know our past generations. And the Medrash comments there is, why is it so significant to know the past generations, to study who came before us? And there are many answers to that question, many good answers to that question. But the Medrash describes to us, because in every generation, we have to know that there's a vestige, there's a remnant of the evil generations that came before us. So specifically, when we talk about the Dor HaMabul, the generation of the flood, and the depravity, the moral depravity that they demonstrated. So that moral depravity, that generation, there's a vestige of that occurs in every generation. And you go to the Dor, the generation of the Migdal Bavel, the Dor HaFlaga, the generations that built the tower. And it was a generation that stood for no longer relying on God, but making yourself a lord over other people and putting yourself, exalting yourself as high as you possibly could. This type of degenerate reaction and approach to the world, that's a vestige that remains in every generation. And the Medrash continues, and it goes throughout all the generations, the generation of Noach, of the flood, of the generation of Sodom and Amorah, and all the types of transgressions that were taking place there. It even talks about the generation of Korach, recognizing that Korach here was a generation that did everything they could to undermine the leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu, to undermine the Mesorah, the traditions that we have in the Jewish people. All of these generations continue to have some input into the generations we have now. And Rav Soloveitchik's comment on this Medrash was a keen one, I believe, because he suggested that you read this Medrash and you start to believe that everything is kind of laid out. I mean, if the Medrash is accurate in telling us that there's a leftover, there's a remnant of evil that exists in every generation, right? And we're certainly coming on the heels of 9/11. We appreciate that. There's that remnant of just wicked people that continue to show what they're about in every single generation. And if that's our lot in life, if that's how it's going to be, so that we tend to think that there's going to be this routine that we have to stick with, that there's a certain structure to the world, that every generation is going to be a bit repetitive than the earlier generations. And again, it's going to be our job to try to make the best of it, despite the evil that's going to be in the world. And Rav Soloveitchik cautions us, because he suggests, although that is certainly the case when it comes to the perspective of a generational view, that in every generation you'll have a vestige of those generations. From an individual's perspective, we know that it's based on a person's deeds, that we can never fall into the trap of thinking that there's a certain routine that we're always going to live through. And with this, Rav Soloveitchik answers the question about what Chazal were thinking in putting the story of the mother of Sisera. As we go through the story, we of course understand that it was actually the king of Canaan at that point, a man by the name of Yavin, who were in power over the Jewish people for 20 years. This is a story that appears in the 4th chapter. If you want to read, if you want to look at yourself, the 4th chapter of the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges. So it's significant that Yavin has already been in power for 20 years, a very long time from the scope of the book of Shoftim, that the Jewish people are under his thumb. And his general Sisera is tremendously powerful. The verse tells us, the pasuk tells us, he has 900 of these iron chariots that he's constantly using to oppress the Jewish people. And the Jewish people, really, there's no break for them. You know, the commentaries explain for us that this is actually a punishment for the Jewish people, that they're to be oppressed to such an extent is because they had an opportunity a little bit earlier to get rid of the Canaanite people when they originally coming into the land of Israel. And because they chose to be perhaps a little bit too compassionate in that sense, and they did not finish the job, so the Canaanites have now risen up once again against the Jewish people, again under the thumb of Yavin the king and Sisera the general for 20 years. And it's this point where Devorah and her general Barak are willing to go out against them. They have 10,000 people, really a mere number compared to these 900 chariots and tremendous amount of people that is up against the Canaanite army. And they win, right? And it's one of these situations where they don't even fight when they win, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is amazing. Lots of times throughout Tanakh, if the Jewish people are going to be victorious, they're not going to have to lift a finger. The pasuk there tells us that Vayahas Canaan, that's a word that's used over and over again. It's used by the Plishtim. It's used all over Tanakh. That there was just a chaotic sense about Sisera's army. They all kind of flew about and they fled, and there was no fight that needed to occur for the Jewish people to be victorious, to the extent where Sisera himself had to flee in order that he not be captured and perhaps killed. And he flees into the tent of Yael. And it's really a fascinating question. Why didn't he flee into the tent of a man as opposed to a woman? And they suggest that because this was the place where he would be. Nobody would suspect him to go into her tent. Now, Yael was a Canaanite. The Canaanite were the descendants of Yisro, interestingly enough. And at that point, it seems like in addition to the Jewish people and the Canaanite people who were living in the land of Israel, they were also the Canaanite people. And they almost had a sense of neutrality about them. They were playing kind of both sides. At times they were friendly towards the Canaanite people. At times they were friendly to the Israelites, and it worked. The Canaanites were able to continue to live in this way. And so comes Sisera, and he's running, and he finds Yael's tent, and he says, "Oh, this is going to be a good place." And she's able to make him feel comfortable enough where he's able to take something cold to drink and go to sleep. And the story there evolves where she's able to put a peg in the side of his head and to kill him, right? To the point where Barak comes and she shows him, I think, I think I have what you're looking for, essentially. And it's a miraculous story. It's a wonderful story. The pasuk there tells us that the Jewish people are able to use this event to get out from under the thumb of Yavin and the Canaanite people, and are able to once again have some level of political sovereignty in their land. But the backstory, the real story to this, is what's happening while Sisera, right, is not on the scene, where nobody knows where he is. And that's the mother of Sisera, who is in a panic. She can't seem to figure out where her son is. And there are maidens there are women there, ladies there, who are trying to convince her, no, the reason that he's late and he hasn't come home yet is because he's collecting all of the booty of the war, that he's collecting everything. He's going to bring you presents, right? He's late because he's busy getting you a gift, and everything is going to be okay. She doesn't buy it, right? She continues to cry, and she really, before anything is officially proclaimed about her son, she almost knows that the trouble is there. And so the mother of Sisera, right, is held up to be this individual who cries despite not knowing what's going to be with her son. And Rav Soloveitchik suggests that the reason that Chazal wanted to input this story into our understanding of the shofar in this period of time of Aseret Yemei Teshuva is because the mother of Sisera was accustomed to a certain routine. This was not her son's first battle. Her son had gone out to many battles. As vicious and cruel, as inhumane as he was, that's what she was accustomed to. And he would come back with all type of spoils of war, and he would come back, as the Mefarshim tell us, almost at the exact same time after every single battle. To that sense of routine she was accustomed to, and she was accustomed to him always being victorious. And now that the routine was no longer, so the illusion of that window that she's looking at, waiting for him to come, the window is smashed. That illusion that she had of her son was smashed because the routine has been smashed. And says Rav Soloveitchik, right, when we are listening to the shofar and just as an extension of this time period, to appreciate the fact that we all live in a routine. I know myself, I still write things down, all the things that I have to do. I have it in my pad. Right? The Rebbe makes fun of me. He's got it all technologically advanced. I have to still write it down in my pad. I need that structure. I need that routine in order to be successful, in order to be productive throughout the day. And if that routine is just thrown off for a little bit, it really throws me for a loop. I will tell you, in our house, we've gotten accustomed to things going different from what option A is. And at this point, we're almost, competitive with each other enough that when option A doesn't work out, all we have to say to each other is, where's option B? Katie and I will do it, and the kids will do it. It really came to a head just a couple of weeks ago. My 12-year-old son, fantastic as he is, he was diagnosed with diabetes type A. Baruch Hashem, he is fine, he's healthy, he's great, he's upbeat, it's wonderful. He's taught us such a lesson in these last 3 weeks. Quite a gift he was given for his 12th birthday. And it's the epitome of, okay, going to option B, right? Diet changes, everything. If you know anything about diabetes, everything in your life changes. But the question is, how good are we at going to option B? When option A, when the routine is smashed, when the illusion of what we believe to be occurring is no longer the case, when we're hit with that realistic change that, oh my gosh, right, the veil was lifted up and now everything that I assumed is now different. how good are we at going to option B? And explains Rav Soloveitchik, that's really why this story is placed at really the forefront of shofar. When we hear shofar, when we think about our tefillos during Aseret Yemei Teshuva, some of the best types of change that we can make is just about ensuring that when things don't go our way, so instead of blowing up, instead of going into a panic, instead of chaos, instead of anxiety getting the best of us, it's, oh, there's always an option B, and I can always make the best of option B. Fascinatingly enough, there's a little bit of an end to this story. As much as as much as I want to emphasize to you that the mother of Sisera is not being held up by Chazal because we should feel bad for her, that's certainly not the case. We do not feel compassion for the enemies of the Jewish people, far from it. But she's being held up in this light to demonstrate that she was somebody who her cries were cries of despair, that she did not know how to go to an option B. The window was smashed. She heard the news of her son, or sensed even the news of her son, and to continue to live a life where everything that she knew up until that point, the routine and the structure that she had up until that point, now has to be different, that was unfathomable to her. Curiously enough, we do find that she has some pretty significant descendants. Shemaiah and Avtalion, who are pre-Mishnaic rabbis of the period of Zugos, right before Shammai and Hillel and Shammai, were big rabbis, big leaders of the Jewish people. As converts, they came from her. And so a suggestion that perhaps in the end, although at that moment in that chapter, she was not able to go to plan B, eventually she didn't collapse. She didn't die at that moment. She was able to continue her life. And as a result, there's some sense of everlasting nature to the ability to move to the next plan. And as a result, Shammai and Avtalion descend from her. Whether it's an anxious mother that we have caused some angst to, or whether it's our relationships with our friends or our coworkers, or whether it's just being able to have a sense of calm and poise about us. When the tshuva process can be overwhelming and that the sense of transgression can be too much, to have that ability to say, hold on, let me put it in perspective. Plan A did not go as I wanted it to be, but plan B can also work. And if we're able to just have that in mind before things get a little bit too crazy, before things get out of hand, I think it would behoove us to really recognize that there's always another way out. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to succeed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands that there's constantly a trap for us, but if there are constant traps for us, there are constant exit strategies. And I think for me, when I think about the mitzvah of Tshuva and these 10 days, we're working on as a family, as a household, what are the exit strategies that we haven't thought about up until this point? When I get consumed with work, when there's anger that can overcome, when there's anxiety that is there, when there's just little things that can make us go off of our game, what are the exit strategies? And the more we are aware of them, the better we can be as people. So my hope and my wish is that we continue to work on those things. That Aseret Yemei Teshuva is always 10 days of getting us back to our basics. It gets us back to what the standards that we hope to have for ourselves, that if we've gotten away from those standards, we can get back to them. And Be'ezus Hashem, with the help of family members, with the help of community members, we can get back to those standards, both in our familial life, in our individual life, as well as our communal life, to make sure that those standards aren't compromised too much. And Be'ezus Hashem, God should continue to bless us with a wonderful, productive year ahead, a healthful year ahead, and with good relations for all of us, for the Jewish people, and certainly for the world abroad. And thank you.
Rabbi Lichter, thank you very much for your encouragement, both from Tanakh and also from your own life. I think both of those are equally impactful for us. We appreciate your sharing those with us. We thank you all very much for joining us tonight in this Aseret Yemei Teshuva mini-series. We look forward to seeing those of you who are coming to Shul. We look forward to seeing you in Shul. Those of you who are not yet comfortable coming back to shul, we look forward to seeing you somewhere. If not on Yom Kippur, then some other day. Know that we are thinking about you and wishing you and your families a Shana Tova Umituka. Everyone have a Gemar Chasima Tova.
Amen. Gemar Chasima Tova.